After 2 years of marriage, my husband told me he wasn't sure about a baby plan with me. Then he insulted me in front of everyone, laughed like it was nothing, and said if I were more beautiful, he'd be excited to plan a baby. What happened next wasn't just betrayal, it was something I never saw coming, and it changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Before I tell you how that moment cracked my life open, do me a small favor. Tap subscribe, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and help this story reach the people who need to hear it. I'm Alyssa Monroe. I'm 35 years old, and until very recently I thought my life was settled in the quiet, unremarkable way people mean when they say happy. Not flashy, not dramatic, just steady. Ethan and I had been married for 2 years, living in a third-floor apartment at Blue Ridge Flats in Asheville, North Carolina, with our gray tabby cat, Olive, who acted like she paid rent and resented us for intruding on her space. We weren't one of those whirlwind couples. We met years ago through mutual friends at a low-key get-together, bonded over bad beer and old cartoons, and built something slowly. Dating turned into moving in together. Moving in turned into marriage. No fireworks, no grand gestures. Just comfort, familiarity, and the kind of love that feels dependable. For most of our marriage, the topic of kids hovered politely in the background. We weren't against it. We just weren't rushing. We wanted to travel a little, get more financially secure, enjoy being married before becoming parents. We agreed we'd seriously talk about it after our second anniversary. That agreement felt safe, predictable. But sometime after that anniversary passed, Ethan's tone changed. It wasn't dramatic at first, just hesitation disguised as logic. When I mentioned scheduling a fertility consultation, he'd say things like, "Let's not rush into medical stuff," or "Can we revisit this after work slows down?" When I sent him articles or timelines, his replies were delayed and brief. "Looks good. We'll see. Maybe later." I told myself it was stress. Ethan worked at Summit Ridge Developments, a construction company that thrived on deadlines and chaos. They'd taken on a massive project, and he'd been pulling long hours. He came home tired, distracted, glued to his phone. Less affectionate, less present. I ignored the unease growing in my chest, because acknowledging it felt like opening a door I wasn't ready to walk through. My best friend Maya noticed before I did. One afternoon at Juniper Brewhouse, she tilted her head and said, "Why does it sound like you're trying to convince your own husband?" I laughed it off, but the question lingered. She suggested we plan a proper date night, something intentional, something that wasn't just collapsing on the couch after work. I took that advice seriously. I made reservations at Trattoria Belluno downtown, wore a dress I hadn't touched in months, and stocked the fridge with Ethan's favorite beer. I wanted us to remember who we were before everything became schedules and caution. Dinner was off. Ethan smiled, but it felt delayed, like he was buffering. He checked his phone too often. His answers were polite, but shallow. When I finally brought up the baby conversation, carefully, gently, he put his fork down and sighed. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all this," he said. All this. Not the appointment. Not the planning. All of it. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice calm. I asked what he meant. He talked around it, mentioning his coworker Brandon Hale and all the horror stories he loved to tell about divorce. He talked about money, pressure, responsibility, about how having a kid changes everything. I agreed. I said that was kind of the point. The conversation spiraled quietly, the way arguments do when you're trying not to make a scene. We barely touched our food. The drive home was silent. That night, Ethan slept on the couch. The next morning was painfully awkward. We moved around each other like strangers in a shared space. He said he was meeting Brandon and some co-workers at the Iron Tap to watch the game. I didn't have the energy to argue. Maya convinced me to get out of the apartment instead. We wandered Homefront Market, my version of stress relief. I bought throw pillows I didn't need and shampoo I didn't love. By early evening I felt steadier, calm enough to go home and try again. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Jordan Blake, one of Ethan's co-workers I'd met once at a company gathering. He asked if I was okay. Said things had gotten weird at the Iron Tap. I called him immediately. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, then told me what happened. The guys had been teasing Ethan about baby plans. Brandon pushed harder, asking what was holding him back. Ethan, drunk and laughing, said something he claimed was a joke, that if I were more beautiful, he'd be excited to plan a baby. He laughed. Some people laughed. Others didn't. Jordan said a few guys called him out. Ethan got defensive and doubled down on it being just a joke. I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. When I finally went inside, Ethan was passed out on the couch, shoes still on, the apartment smelling like stale beer. I took Olive into the bedroom and locked the door. Sunday morning, Ethan tried to fix things with breakfast, coffee and bacon, his go-to apology. When I told him what I knew, his face fell. He minimized, blamed alcohol, said he didn't mean it, said it wasn't about me. None of that mattered. You can't unhear something like that. You can't unknow that the person you trusted used your body as a punchline. I grabbed my purse and went to my brother Ryan's place. Ryan was furious, ready to confront Ethan, but I asked him not to. I didn't want to fight. I wanted space. Ethan texted all day. Apologies, explanations, promises. I replied once. I needed time. Monday morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Susan, Ethan's mom. Her voice sounded strained, almost shaky. She asked if we could talk. Said Ethan had called his dad the night before, and there was something important I needed to know. We agreed to meet at Juniper Brew House later that morning. I sat in my car 15 minutes early, staring at my hands, wondering how life can tilt so fast. I thought I was walking into a conversation about damage control. I had no idea I was about to learn the truth that would change everything. I walked into Juniper Brew House, trying to prepare myself for every reasonable possibility. Maybe Susan wanted to apologize on Ethan's behalf. Maybe she wanted to convince me he'd spoken out of stress. Maybe she just wanted to make sure I was okay. All of those scenarios hurt, but they were survivable. What I wasn't prepared for was the look on her face. Susan was already seated at a corner table near the window, hands wrapped tightly around a mug she hadn't touched. Her eyes were red and swollen, the way they get after a long night of crying. In the 5 years I'd known her, I'd never seen her without makeup, never seen her look anything less than put together. That alone made my stomach twist. She stood when she saw me and pulled me into a hug that lingered a second too long. She smelled like lavender laundry soap, something comforting and domestic that suddenly felt out of place in the middle of my unraveling life. We sat down. I ordered coffee I barely wanted. There was a moment of small talk that felt insulting in its normalcy. How was traffic? How was work? Before Susan finally took a breath and said my name like it weighed something. Alyssa, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without hurting you. My hands went cold. She told me Ethan had called his father, Richard, the night before in a complete emotional breakdown. Richard, who almost never cried, had called her afterward, crying himself because he didn't know what to do with what he'd been told. That alone stunned me. Ethan rarely talked to his dad about emotional things. Growing up, Richard had been distant, rigid, the kind of man who believed feelings were something you dealt with privately. Susan swallowed hard and continued. There's someone at Ethan's work, she said. Her name is Claire. The name hit me like a physical blow. Claire Donovan, the new project coordinator at Summit Ridge. Ethan had mentioned her a few times in passing, always casually, always professionally. I'd met her briefly at a company event months earlier. She'd seemed perfectly normal, friendly, forgettable. Susan explained that Ethan had developed feelings for Claire over the past few months. Nothing physical had happened, at least according to what he told his parents, but there had been an emotional attachment. Conversations, confiding, the kind of closeness that shouldn't exist outside a marriage. I stared at Susan, my coffee untouched, feeling like the room was tilting. Suddenly everything made sense. The distance, the phone glued to his hand, the way his doubts about babies and commitment had surfaced out of nowhere. What I told myself was stress now had a shape. When I asked Susan why she was telling me this, why she wasn't protecting her son, her voice broke. "Because I've lived this," she said. "And because I don't want you blaming yourself the way I did." She told me about the months before Richard had left her years ago. The unexplained distance. The cruel comments disguised as jokes. The way he'd picked fights over nothing, as if trying to push her away so he wouldn't have to admit the truth. When he finally left, it had been easier to pretend she wasn't enough than to face his betrayal. "I see the same pattern now," she said softly, "and I won't be complicit in it." By the time we stood to leave, my hands were shaking. Susan hugged me again and told me I deserved honesty, certainty, and someone who chose me without hesitation. I sat in my car for a long time after that, staring at my phone. There were unread messages from Ethan, apologies that suddenly felt hollow. He still hadn't mentioned Claire. Instead of responding, I called Maya and asked if I could stay with her. She didn't ask questions. She just said she'd put clean sheets on the pull-out couch. That night, curled up in Maya's living room, I finally texted Ethan back. One sentence. "I know about Claire. Don't contact me again until you're ready to tell me the full truth." Then I blocked his number. Not forever, just long enough to breathe. The next morning, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. It was Natalie, Ethan's sister. She sounded worried, confused. She'd heard about the bar incident through Brandon and wanted to know what was going on. When I told her I was meeting Susan and had learned about Claire, there was a pause on the line. "Oh," she said quietly. "That." My heart dropped. I asked what she meant. She immediately backtracked, said it wasn't her place, urged me to hear their mom out. But the damage was done. This wasn't new. This wasn't isolated. Later that afternoon, another text came through from a number I didn't recognize. "Alyssa, this is Claire. I know this is inappropriate, but I think we need to talk. There's more you deserve to know." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The woman I'd been quietly blaming. The woman at the center of everything. She wanted to meet. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to protect myself. But something deeper told me I needed the truth from the source. I replied with 2 words. "When and where?" We met the next morning at Maple Row Cafe near the park. Neutral, public, safe. Claire looked nothing like the villain I'd imagined. She seemed nervous, uncomfortable, twisting her coffee cup between her hands. She told me immediately that she had no idea Ethan had feelings for her until Brandon mentioned it casually the week before. According to her, their conversations had been about work, stress, life, never romantic. She showed me their message history. It was boring, professional, occasional memes, nothing inappropriate. Then she dropped the second bomb. Brandon had been encouraging Ethan, telling him he was settling, that he should explore options before being tied down. That Claire understood him better than I did. Brandon had been stirring things up at work, framing Ethan as trapped, pushing him toward doubt. By the time Claire finished, I felt strangely calm. She wasn't the problem. She was collateral damage. That realization didn't save my marriage, but it clarified something important. Ethan hadn't been confused. He'd been weak, and he'd let someone else's voice matter more than mine. I left that cafe knowing one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, I was done chasing certainty from someone who couldn't offer it. And the hardest part was realizing the confrontation still hadn't happened yet. I didn't sleep much that night. After meeting Claire, my mind wouldn't slow down. Every moment from the last few months replayed itself with cruel clarity. Every delayed text, every distracted answer, every time Ethan chose silence over honesty. What I'd mistaken for confusion now looked a lot like avoidance. Not because he didn't know what he felt, but because he didn't want to face the consequences of it. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep floating in limbo. I needed answers, and I needed them in a way that didn't allow Ethan to twist the narrative again. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. I asked Natalie to help me set up a family meeting. Neutral ground, witnesses, no yelling, no rewriting history afterward. Natalie didn't hesitate. She offered her apartment by the river, ordered food so no one would have to think about cooking, and insisted Brandon be there too. I didn't love that part, but I understood why it mattered. What had happened wasn't just between Ethan and me anymore. Too many people had played a role. That evening felt unreal, like I was walking into a staged reenactment of my own life. Susan arrived first, hugging me tightly. I could feel her shaking. Richard followed, quieter than usual, his jaw clenched. Brandon showed up next, loud and casual, joking about traffic like we were all there for a normal dinner. Ethan arrived last. He looked awful. Dark circles under his eyes. Clothes wrinkled. He wouldn't meet my gaze at first. Just sat down and stared at his plate. The sight of him like that didn't soften me the way it once would have. It just made me sad. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about nothing. Natalie's new coffee table, work schedules, the weather. Pasta went cold on plates, while the truth sat between us, heavy and unavoidable. Susan finally broke the silence. "We're not here to pretend everything's fine," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "We're here because something has gone very wrong, and it needs to be addressed honestly." That was my cue. I told them everything. What Jordan had told me about the bar, what Susan had shared, what Claire had revealed at the cafe. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts. As I spoke, I watched Brandon's expression shift. Confusion gave way to irritation. Irritation to defensiveness. He interrupted, laughing, saying he'd just been looking out for his friend. Natalie shut him down immediately. "This isn't about you being helpful," she said sharply. "This is about you undermining a marriage." Ethan finally spoke then, his voice quiet and strained. He admitted Claire had been friendly, nothing more. That he'd taken normal kindness and turned it into something bigger because he was scared. Scared of becoming his father, scared of commitment, scared of making the wrong choice. When I brought up the comment at the bar, he looked genuinely ashamed. He said it had nothing to do with my appearance, that he'd said it to look tough in front of Brandon, to avoid being called whipped, to deflect attention away from his own doubts. Hearing that didn't make it better. It made it worse, because it meant he'd sacrificed my dignity to protect his ego. Brandon tried to brush it off as guy talk. Susan and Natalie both snapped at him at the same time. Richard stayed silent, staring at the table like he was watching his past repeat itself in real time. That's when I said it, quietly, clearly. "I don't think we're moving forward with the baby plan. Or this marriage. Not like this." The room went completely still. Ethan protested immediately. Said he loved me. Said he was just scared. Said he wanted to fix things. Therapy, counseling, anything. He reached for my hand, and I pulled it back. I told him love wasn't the issue. Honesty was. Certainty was. I told him I'd spent months ignoring signs because it was easier than confronting the truth. That I deserved someone who was sure about me, not someone who needed a family intervention to decide. Brandon made a sarcastic comment about me being dramatic. Natalie told him to leave. What followed wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was slow and painful and final. We talked for hours. Old wounds surfaced. Patterns were named. Ethan admitted he hadn't been honest with himself or me. Susan cried. Richard apologized for the example he'd set, for the damage he'd caused without realizing it. By midnight, there was nothing left to say. The conclusion wasn't screamed or slammed into place. It settled quietly between us. The marriage was over. Not in anger. Not in chaos. Just in recognition that something fundamental had broken, and no amount of good intentions could repair it quickly enough to make continuing healthy. Natalie drove me back to Maya's place afterward. She promised I wasn't losing her or Susan, that whatever happened with Ethan, I was still family to them. I believed her. That night, lying awake on the pull-out couch, I didn't cry right away. I opened the notes app on my phone and made a list. Cancel appointments, separate finances, talk to the landlord, pack essentials, figure out next steps. It felt surreal, dismantling a life line by line. The next morning, Ethan texted asking if we could meet to talk logistics, keys, accounts, furniture. Practical, polite, final. Ryan texted too, offering to come help me pack. My mom called, having heard through relatives, asking if she should cancel flights she'd booked just in case. I twisted my wedding ring absently, the habit so ingrained I barely noticed it. It felt heavier than it ever had. I called the clinic we'd contacted about fertility consultations and canceled the appointment. Then I called the landlord. Then I went to work because sitting alone with my thoughts felt worse than answering phones and pretending everything was normal. No one asked questions. Or maybe they did, silently. Either way, I was grateful. That evening, as I lay in Maya's living room watching a baking show I wasn't really following, my phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. I know I messed up. I know sorry isn't enough. I just want you to know I'm willing to do the work. I stared at it for a long time. Then I set the phone face down and turned the volume off. Because some realizations come too late to undo the damage. And I was finally ready to stop carrying the weight of fixing someone who broke me to protect himself. And yet, even then, I didn't know the story was still unfolding. 3 months have passed since that night at Natalie's apartment. The night my marriage ended without shouting, without slammed doors, without the kind of drama people expect when something so big falls apart. 3 months of learning how to live inside the quiet aftermath. The practical things happened first because they had to. Ethan moved out of Blue Ridge Flats within a week. Ryan and Maya helped me box his things while he was at work, carefully labeling everything so there'd be no reason for another emotional conversation. It felt strange dividing our shared life into piles. His mugs, my dishes, his jackets, my sweaters, his books, my notebooks. 5 years reduced to cardboard boxes and sticky notes. When Ethan came to collect his things, we didn't talk much. We exchanged keys like strangers completing a transaction. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his choices had finally settled onto his shoulders. I didn't feel satisfaction watching him leave. Just relief, mixed with grief. I stayed in the apartment for 2 more weeks. Every room echoed. Olive wandered around confused, meowing at doors that no longer opened. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. The landlord agreed to let me break the lease for a fee. It hurt financially, but staying felt worse. Some costs are worth paying. Finding a new place wasn't easy. Asheville's rental market isn't kind to sudden single incomes. I ended up in a smaller 1-bedroom across town at Hawthorne Court Apartments. It's quieter. There's a tiny balcony where I've started growing herbs in cheap pots. The basil keeps dying. The mint refuses to. I've decided to take that as a metaphor I don't fully understand yet. Money became something I had to think about in ways I hadn't before. Groceries cost more when you're not splitting them. Streaming services feel indulgent. I learned how to budget, how to say no to impulse purchases, how to sit with the discomfort of financial independence instead of fearing it. It wasn't glamorous. It was grounding. The ring went into a drawer. Some days I forgot it was there. Other days I took it out and stared at it, wondering how something so small could hold so many promises. Ethan told me to keep it, said it felt wrong to take it back. I still haven't decided what to do with it. Social media was its own challenge. I waited weeks before changing my relationship status, dreading the questions. When I finally did, the messages poured in concern, curiosity, unsolicited advice. I posted a single vague update asking for privacy and muted notifications. A few days later, I posted a photo of my new apartment keys with the caption, "New Beginnings." It got fewer likes than my wedding photo had. Somehow that felt right. Ethan and I spoke only when necessary. Logistics. Mail. Accounts we'd forgotten to separate. Each conversation was civil and careful, like navigating broken glass. Once he asked if we could meet. I agreed, against my better judgment. We met at a coffee shop near my new place. Neutral territory. He looked different, thinner, tired, like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. He told me he'd started therapy. Showed me a journal he'd been keeping, filled with reflections about his father, his fear of commitment, the way he let Brandon's influence outweigh his own values. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for another chance. He just said he should have done the work sooner. I believed him. That didn't mean it changed anything. We parted politely. I wished him well. And for the first time I meant it. Not because I wanted him back, but because holding on to anger felt heavier than letting go. The surprising part was maintaining relationships with his family. Susan texted me often, sending garden updates and funny memes. Natalie and I started meeting for breakfast every other Sunday. They never pushed, never asked invasive questions. They let me exist as myself, not as Ethan's wife. I started therapy too, not just because of the marriage ending, but because it made me see how much I'd compromised myself along the way. How often I'd ignored discomfort to preserve peace. How I'd learned to explain away hurt instead of honoring it. My therapist encouraged me to reclaim things I'd quietly set aside. I started hiking again on Saturday mornings. Ethan had always hated early wake-ups. Now, I watched the sun rise over trails I'd missed without realizing it. Dating hasn't entered the picture yet. People suggest it. I smile and deflect. I'm not ready. I'm learning how to be alone without feeling lonely, and that feels like important work. The most unexpected moment came from what should have been the saddest task of all, canceling the trip we'd planned. A 10-day stay in a small coastal cottage in the Outer Banks. Non-refundable, of course. For weeks, I avoided the reminder on my calendar. Then Maya said something that stopped me. Why don't you go anyway? The idea terrified me. Traveling alone felt like an admission of failure, like walking into a place designed for two with only one heartbeat. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like an opportunity instead of a punishment. So next week I'm going. I booked the time off, packed books, downloaded podcasts, bought a swimsuit chosen entirely for comfort. I don't know what I'll find there, clarity, grief, peace, or just a really bad sunburn. But I know I want to experience it on my own terms. The other day, our song came on while I was grocery shopping. 3 months ago, it would have wrecked me. This time, it felt like pressing on a bruise that's almost healed. Tender, but not debilitating. Progress, not perfection. I still have moments where I reach for my phone to tell Ethan something funny before remembering we don't do that anymore. I still kill plants. I still get frustrated when the shower temperature changes without warning. Healing isn't linear, and independence isn't glamorous. But here's what I know now. I didn't lose my marriage because I wasn't beautiful enough. I didn't lose it because I wanted too much or asked too soon. I lost it because I finally stopped accepting uncertainty as love. And if you've made it this far into my story, I want to say this. If any part of it felt familiar, if you've ever felt yourself shrinking to make someone else comfortable, please listen to that quiet voice inside you. It's trying to protect you. If this story resonated with you, do me a favor before you go. Subscribe, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes, the ending you didn't want becomes the beginning you needed.